Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. As neighbors, Iran and Pakistan have always sought to improve their bilateral relations. Overshadowing these efforts have been reimposed American sanctions on Iran. For Pakistan, Iranian natural gas and electricity supplies would be advantageous to its economic efforts. Will the countries be able to find ways around the sanctions and improve political and trade ties? To discuss that further, we're now joined by Hamid Reza Ghulamzadeh, who is a foreign policy expert, and he's joining us from Tehran. Hamid Reza, thanks for joining us. What do you make, Hamid Reza, currently of the situation between Pakistan and Iran? It seems, of course, that these sanctions are creating obstacles.
First, thank you very much for having me. Actually, we are in a very, let's say, particular situation right now in the region. We have a volatile region in Middle East, and we have a, let's say, post-ISIS situation in Syria and Iraq, and we have also possibilities of having that security problem in Afghanistan, just a neighbor to both Iran and Pakistan. We have on the other side of the world President Trump, which is a phenomenon for himself. And of course, we also have the Saudi Arabia and the Yemen situation here in this region. So the situation is very, very special, and it needs special cooperation. In recent days and months, we can say, we have seen more cooperation between the two sides, between Iran and Pakistan. But there for sure are more grounds for more cooperation, more linkages between the two capitals, and more connections between different categories of cooperation, like economy, security, military, politics, and etc.
All right, so just give us your point of view, if you can, Hamid Reza, on what possibly Iran's concerns are, specifically when it comes to the border issues, because that's something that has come up in the past when it comes to the relations between Pakistan and Iran. We know that there have been agreements signed, seemingly, about security at the border.
Actually, in terms of cooperation between Iran and Pakistan, I would like to divide them into two parts. First is bilateral relations, the other is regional. In bilateral, as you just mentioned, the most important one, top priority is security. That issue is very important. Fortunately, we have had improvement during last years. We have had much improvements compared to, for example, a decade or 2 decades ago. But there still is the problem, and they need to actually make better decisions in that regard. This border security guards issue can be a very good ground of cooperation to show for the Pakistani side to show, let's say, a good gesture to show that they are working hard and they are interested in working closely with the Iranian side to solve the security problems that we have in this part of the world, and that security, that port which is very important. There we have both port cities that Iran and Pakistan have, and it needs a security situation in that port. Security and safety is very important for both countries in that region. So if Chabahar is going to be a world port and an important port for Iranian export and import, the other side is as well important for Pakistanis, and that region needs this security. That can also affect this economic situation for the two countries. So this security issue at the borders can be a very good and constructive step between the two countries for the moment.
Okay, let's add another voice to this conversation. We're also now joined by Abbas Aslani, who is a journalist, and he is also joining us from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Abbas, thanks for joining us here in The Scope. Abbas, what do you make currently of the relations between Pakistan and Iran? And we can talk, obviously, about the obstacles and challenges that are created because of the American sanctions on Iran.
Well, thank you for having me. In fact, Iran and Pakistan as countries sharing some joint borders together, they have had a long history of relations between the countries. But in this process, we have been seeing that some other countries trying to have some impact on the quality of these relations. Part of that impact has been coming from countries like the United States by trying to put pressure on Pakistani government in their relations with Iran. And this pressure has come with issues or measures like sanctions imposed against Iran. So this has been a kind of obstacle in trying to deteriorate, or let's say to exert some impact on the Iran and Pakistan relations. But I think Iran on the one side and Pakistan on the other side, understanding the importance of this relation, they have tried to, by as much as they can, to decrease those pressures in trying to have impact in those relations, and they have tried to improve the relation in order to be able to manage the issues which exist between both countries, because they have some issues related to the security of the borders, and we have been seeing that the Iranian political officials, as well as sometimes defense officials, exchanging some trips with Pakistani officials in order to resolve those issues. On the other hand, on the economic front as well, both countries, while having some obstacles like the sanctions of the United States, but they have tried to manage those issues and to be able to cooperate together. And in the aftermath of the new government in Pakistan, under the prime ministership of Mr. Imran Khan, I think the possibility or the opportunity for both countries has increased to have better relations in this area. And at this time, however, yet the question of sanctions against Iran by the United States is the matter of question. But this is something which is applying to other countries as well. But these days we are seeing that the countries are opposing to the unilateral policies or sanctions of the United States, and they are criticizing the American government on their policies and ignoring the other countries. And I think and I hope that countries like Pakistan will be able to pursue and follow an independent policy toward other countries, including Iran, and in having their relations.
Right. So Hamid, rather, I'll bring you back in. Hamid, and I wanted to ask you, and I know you mentioned this already, the situation in Afghanistan is obviously important to both Pakistan and Iran. And we've seen, of course, the Pakistani government taking now a leading role when it comes to this peace process with the Taliban, specifically in Afghanistan. The foreign minister even visiting Iran during his regional tour. We also have had now Iran being involved in talks with the Taliban at some level as well. Do you think that cooperation between Pakistan and Iran can help possibly bring some form of peace to Afghanistan?
Of course it can, but we should consider the point that Abbas just mentioned, that if countries in the region act independently, they can bring security to their own region. For the last almost 18 years, we have seen U.S. presence here in Afghanistan, and the outcome is just a crisis and a disaster in Afghanistan. If, just like now, we can have Iran, Pakistan, we have Turkey, and these regional countries working independently for the security of the region, for sure it can have very, very fruitful results, and it can bring it to a very, let's say, a result that can be acceptable to all the sides of the discussion in Afghanistan and, of course, in the region. But I insist that it is very important to have this independence in the region for the countries, not only for themselves but also for the region, to be a player in the region, to be actually providing security for the region by providing security between themselves, which now here is the possible presence of ISIS in Afghanistan, and of course the negotiations between Taliban and Afghan officials in that country.
Okay, so Abbas, if I may go back to you for a moment, Abbas, and ask you, what do you make of how Pakistan and Iran can cooperate when it comes to Afghanistan? We've already seen that sort of cooperation with the Pakistani foreign minister's visit to Iran.
Let's not forget that the situation which exists in Afghanistan today and a kind of power vacuum in the country comes as a result of an American military invasion to the country in 2001. But the realities exist in that country, and I think countries in the region, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, and some others, because the region is their home, they have to be trying to bring peace and stability back to the region, including Afghanistan. So in this process, and we have been seeing that Iran implementing a new approach recently by trying to contact and to talk to Taliban in order to facilitate the peace process in the country. We have been hearing that some players in the aftermath of defeating mostly Daesh or ISIS in Syria, they have been trying to transfer maybe some elements of Daesh to countries in the region, including Afghanistan. So this is a dangerous process, and this needs the efforts of countries in the region in order to stop that process and to help Afghanistan and Afghani people in order to be able to handle the situation in that country. So Iran has started to implement a new approach by getting to reach out to the Taliban and informing and keeping the Afghan government informed on this issue, so to be able to facilitate and speed up the peace process in the country. What is important from, I think, in Iranian policy toward Afghanistan is that Iranian government will continue to work based on the cooperation with the Afghan government. But in addition to that, if Iranians think that they can make any contribution or help by negotiating or talking to Taliban, they will continue to do so. But this does not mean that they have necessarily recognized Taliban as a governmental player, but this is to help the different sides who are Afghans to engage in talks in order to resolve their problems. And this is much better than the intervention of some extraterritorial countries or countries which are not in the region, and they want to have their pressure and influence in countries like Afghanistan. I think that process is better than this, and trying to just pave the way for Afghans to engage in talks and to try to resolve their own problems themselves. This is much better than any other country's intervention in the issues which exist in the country.
Hamid, I'll bring you back in on this and ask you, when it comes to cooperation in general in the region, when it comes to Pakistan and Iran, we've already spoken, of course, about Afghanistan and the Pakistani foreign minister's visit there. But what other regional issues do you think that Pakistan and Iran can cooperate on? And how important is it for these neighbors to now have more trade, more people-to-people connections as well, something that, in fact, the Pakistani ambassador to Iran just recently brought up in her meeting with the Iran Sistan and Balochistan Governor Ahmed Ali Mohabbati.
Actually, the Pakistan Navy is going to dock in Bandar Abbas in following days, and there are going to be meetings between officials from both sides. That is an example of very fruitful cooperation between the two countries. The navy powers of the two sides can secure the Persian Gulf and Sea of Oman Sea, which is very important for the security of this region, for the security of trade, and for the benefit of both countries. That is one example for security of the region. There are not only the navies, there are also more grounds for cooperation in terms of military drills and war games and such things to actually add security to the region and also to the border problem that we just discussed. And moreover, there are, as you said, there are much grounds for cooperation between, let's say, better relations between people. The Pakistani ambassador to Tehran is a very significant person. I've been in meetings with her, and she's very active actually and concerned about connections between the two sides to actually touch the commonalities between the two cultures, which has a strong history between the two cultures and let's say literature and art and all areas that actually people share with each other. So touching that commonalities can help the nations understand each other better, and this mutual understanding can help boost economic trades between the two countries. It can boost actually tourism industry between the two countries, and of course at the top of all it can increase the mutual understanding, which can help the security.
Abbas, tell me at this point in time, as we were talking about there with Hamid Reza, what do you make of the need for people-to-people connections between Pakistanis and Iranians?
The Iran and Pakistan relations, because that can have if you want to have a broader view of the relations, we will need to address different issues and different areas. From the security issues which exist in the region, mostly related to the neighbor issues, to the economic issues as well, because issues like the IP gas pipeline, which were about to happen between Iran and Pakistan, didn't happen because of the pressures of the United States. So the countries need to address the economic issues, and this is something important because economy can contribute to the security situation and stability in the region and between the countries. And let's not forget the cultural issues. Iran and Pakistan, both being Muslim nations, they share different, let's say, viewpoints toward many things culturally. So in this regard, the people-to-people relations, via, as Hamid said, improving or increasing the tourism or the exchanges between the universities or different institutions in both countries can be very helpful. So a comprehensive cooperation from political spectrum to security to economy and cultural issues all can one in basket of trying to contribute and improve the relations of both countries.
All right, we're going to add another voice to this conversation about Pakistan-Iran relations under this shadow, I should say, of U.S. sanctions on Iran at this point in time. We're going to discuss that further with Mr. Muzammil Aslam, who is an economist, and he's joining us now from Karachi. Muzammil, thanks for joining us here in The Scope. What do you make of the challenge that the sanctions have presented to furthering economic relations between Pakistan and Iran?
I think both countries shares quite a lot of synergies in terms of trade and finance, and actually we complement each other in terms of the needs. Iran is the energy-rich country, whereas Pakistan is agriculture-based economy, and Iran, they import quite a lot of food items plus livestock. At the same time, we need energy and oil and electricity. And just very recently, Iran has offered Pakistan 3,000 megawatt electricity at the cheap rates.
Yeah.
So I think both countries are very important to each other. But unfortunately, there is a U.S. in between. And given U.S. tough on Iran for the last 20, 30 years, it has been very difficult to trade openly with Iran. But having said this all, we are doing it officially or through unofficially as well.
So I wonder, Muzammil, there is talk of trading and having economic relations away from the US dollar. Is that, do you think, a good way to go about improving economic relations and trade between the two countries, to ditch the dollar in those transactions?
I think that's very good and important for both of the countries, because Iran is struggling to have US dollar-based reserves, and we are encountering the same situation because our deficits have been huge in the last 2 years. and we don't have literally dollars left to finance our trade. So if both countries are going to trade in local currencies, there is nothing better option than this. But the problem is, if you recall, 5-6 years ago, Iran and Pakistan have decided to build an Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline.
Yeah.
But U.S. came in between and they have asked us to defer this project. And that does not bode well to the relationship of the both countries as well. So I'm wondering if both countries have decided to trade in local currency.
Yeah.
I don't know what post-reaction we might see from U.S. on this.
And then obviously, you know, they are neighboring countries at the end of the day, Muzammil. So I imagine that it's not just about trade, but then we can talk as well about tourism both ways, really. Do you think that people-to-people contact as well, even in economic terms, is important for both neighbors?
Yes, I think that there is more people-to-people contact between two countries than the government-to-government at the moment, because Iran gets a lot of religious tourism from Pakistan because of the some sacred sites over there, and there are more bonding between the people of the both sides of the countries, and that is actually leaving a lot of room in terms of the cross-border trade as well.
Okay, and then you know, obviously politics comes into all of this, doesn't it, Muzammil? When we talk about things like, for example, regional politics, if I may for a moment, the Afghan peace process, for example, that Pakistan is currently pushing for as well. How important is cooperation between both countries on that sphere? Because that obviously all has impact as well on economic relations. At the end of the day, no one wants to trade in an insecure environment.
Yes, obviously Iran has a big role in terms of Afghanistan. For example, Afghanistan is a landlocked country, and what they need in terms of trade and especially in trades, they route Pakistani ports. But Iran obviously have the alternative ports like Chabahar to feed Afghanistan as well. So it is very important to have a very peaceful and stable relationship between these three countries. Any instability, is not good for, all three tripartite countries, for example, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. So recently what we saw is Pakistan has taken the first mover advantage, and we did a one peace conference in Islamabad where we invited delegates from Iran, Afghanistan, and other countries as well. So all governments are working on this direction, and hopefully the peace will prevail in the years to follow.
Very well, Muzammil, we'll leave that as our final word. And of course, we appreciate you taking your time out to share your thoughts with us on this very important relationship between Pakistan and Iran at this time. That was Muzammil Aslam, economist, speaking to us from Karachi. We were also earlier joined by Abbas Aslani, journalist, speaking to us from the Iranian capital, Tehran, and Hamid Reza Ghulamzadeh, who is a foreign policy expert, who was also speaking to us from Tehran. Now, viewers, all of our guests here spoke about the importance of the relations between Pakistan and Iran, but of course, under the shadow of U.S. sanctions, which have proven to be a challenge that needs to be overcome. Is a possible way to overcome that challenge to trade in local currencies? We'll have to wait and see. Then, of course, there is always cooperation on the border, security for both countries, of course, in that case, and of course, the Afghan peace process, as I mentioned there at the end with Muzammil as well. We'll keep a close eye on these relations as they improve, seemingly going forward between these two countries. Stay with us, though. I'll be back with our next segment after this break. Viewers, thanks for staying with us here in The Scope. In this segment, we're going to discuss Pakistan's efforts towards Afghan peace, including bringing more regional countries into the fold. On a trip to Turkey at the invitation of the Turkish president, Prime Minister Imran Khan has discussed Afghan peace. President Erdogan, for his part, has now promised to host the Afghan and Pakistani leadership after March in a trilateral meeting towards furthering the Afghan peace process. To discuss all of this a bit further, we're joined by Mr. Imtiaz Gul, who is an analyst, and we're also joined by Dr. Khalid Agous, who is an international relations professor and is managing director at the Social Policy and Development Center, and she's joining us from Karachi. Dr. Khalida and Mr. Gul, thanks for joining us. Dr. Khalida, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of what's been achieved vis-a-vis Turkey now set to host this trilateral meeting and its role as a whole when it comes to the Afghan peace process? This, of course, with the encouragement of Pakistan.
Turkey of late has been extremely active as far as the developments have been taking place. And then, of course, we do also realize as far as the bilateralism is taking place between the two countries. But we do see Turkey playing an increasingly proactive role as far as the regional political developments are concerned. So I would say that they are there in Syria as far as ISIS is concerned and as far as the security situation is concerned, and trying to see that the peace is restored within the region. Your question specifically, how crucial it is vis-a-vis Afghanistan, with an increasingly proactive role within the region, I would personally say that this gesture of diplomatically coming forward and offering that kind of an coming forward in playing in and offering itself to facilitate a process whereby peace can be restored and brought. Where in restoring the peace, I think it's very important and very crucial. Personally, I would say that Pakistan and Turkey of late have been coming closer, and some of the developments which have taken place have also indicated that they are further building grounds for strengthening the multifaceted relationship.
Very well. If you allow me, Dr. Khalida, I do apologize for interrupting you.
Relationship between the two countries.
I wanted to bring in Mr. Gul. Allow me. Mr. Gul is back. Mr. Gul, I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are about Turkey being involved in the Afghan peace process, seemingly with the encouragement, of course, of Pakistan.
Well, I think it's very clear. There's increasing regional consensus on how to approach the Afghan issue. Turkey has been involved in the Afghan process, I think, from the very beginning. In fact, the Afghanistan-focused Heart of Asia conferences also began in Istanbul. So it was something that took birth in Turkey itself. So it augurs very well for Pakistan as well as its extended friendly community, which essentially means Saudi Arabia, UAE, Turkey, China, Russia, as well as Iran, that they increasingly find themselves on the same page. And I think that has also been Pakistan's endeavor to project Afghanistan as a shared responsibility of the extended neighborhood of Afghanistan and not solely of Pakistan, the way the U.S., Afghans, and the Indian politicians have been projecting it. And for them, Pakistan has been the sole source of troubles of Afghanistan and also the sole source of resolution, whereas Pakistan has finally managed to convey to everyone, including the United States, that it alone cannot bring any peace to Afghanistan, and that its immediate neighborhood, including Iran, shall have to be also on board for any way forward on the Afghan reconciliation process.
So I wonder then, Mr. Gul, when we're talking about specifically Turkey here, in this specific case, as you mentioned, Pakistan wants all these regional countries on board because, as you said, it cannot take the responsibility on alone, and simply not logical to do that when it comes to Afghanistan. But do you think the United States understands that, or will the U.S. see this regional alliance or alliance that may be forming as somewhat of a threat, or do you think that the U.S. will just be reassured that when it walks away from Afghanistan, whenever that does happen, that there won't be a power vacuum of sorts?
Well, right now there are two faces of the United States. One is a non-conventional president, Donald Trump, and the other one is the traditional U.S. military security establishment, which is still very reluctant in walking out of Afghanistan, whereas President Trump is looking at Afghanistan as well as other adventures of the United States purely in numerical terms. For him, it has been a very costly affair, and that's why he decided to abruptly walk out of Syria. And probably his intention is also to do the same, although I'm a little skeptical in the case of Afghanistan that it will not be that easy for the president to announce a unilateral abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan. I think after having signaled to the world that he may pull out 7,000 troops and leaving behind only 7,000 in Afghanistan, now probably there is recalibration given the complexities, given United States' singular focus on Iran, on China, and its proximity with India. So that will make it very difficult for President Trump to execute his initial promise of pulling out troops out of Afghanistan. Perhaps we could see a symbolic pullout, which would give President Trump a face saving, and it will also probably partially address the Taliban's ultimate maximalist demand, that is of total withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan.
You know, one thing about Turkey, Mr. Gul, which is important to mention, obviously, is that it is, of course, a member of NATO, but it hasn't taken on a role on the ground in Afghanistan beyond military trainers. It has been involved, mind you, since the U.S. invasion, NATO invasion there began. Do you think that Turkey, in a sense, has played it smart by remaining fairly in a peacemaking role versus a more assertive NATO role in Afghanistan?
Well, I think it makes sense for all the countries of the region, other than those who are immediate neighbors, not to get directly involved in such conflicts, because particularly in Afghanistan, foreign occupation has been sort of a stigma. We remember what happened to the Soviet Union. We know what has been happening to the United States and other NATO member countries' troops. So I think it's Turkey and other countries are sensible enough not to get directly involved in this. And this is how probably it will stay, because the Afghanistan society primarily remains a medieval tribal society where foreign footprint is not accepted. And until outsiders respect that tradition, regardless whether it's good or bad, I think it will be very difficult to convince Afghans to agree on an intra-Afghan dialogue for a possible way forward, a peaceful way out of the conflict in the coming months.
But then obviously, I imagine, Mr. Gul, that there would be a lot of skepticism on the part of some, or at least in the Afghan government, when it comes to possibly Turkey, because we've seen already that Turkey has supported a former warlord, who in fact had a criminal case against him in Afghanistan. He was hosted by Turkey. He is still, I believe, hosted by Turkey. He's set up now a political alliance against Ashraf Ghani. That goes to show that I imagine that Turkey really does have its own interests, doesn't it, which don't necessarily always align with the Ghani government or the Afghan establishment. That sort of muddies the water, doesn't it? Because then all these players that may be added to this peace process or have been there from the beginning, that makes any peace that much more challenging?
Well, I don't think that's that challenging, just because in conflicts all over the world, we have seen proxies or favorite leaders being supported by respective countries, even if they may be on the other side of the conflict, even if they have committed mistakes or excesses against their own populations. This has been a trend all over. But eventually, when countries move towards conflict resolution, many of such people are co-opted into the conflict resolution mechanisms. This is what happened, for instance, to the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. At one time, he had been the most hunted, wanted terrorist, but then eventually the Oslo Accords turned him into a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. So I think countries do safeguard their own interests. If the United States can safeguard or can intervene in foreign countries over 10,000 kilometers away in the name of national security, why can't other countries like Iran, Turkey, or Pakistan try to safeguard their interests, their respective interests in that particular country or region?
And as a final thought, then, I wanted to get from you, Mr. Gul, before letting you go, is this of the narrative that exists in some people's minds about when the United States leaves Afghanistan, if that were to occur at some point in time in the future? Right now, we're just talking about a drawdown of some sort. When that will happen is still unclear. But if there were to be a withdrawal at some point, the concern is that who will fill that vacuum? At this point in time, do you think regional countries can pick up from where the U.S. left things and possibly just improve and do a much better job than what the U.S. has done?
Well, let's not be presumptive about the abrupt or immediate impending pullout of the U.S. and other NATO troops from Afghanistan. I think all countries, including Pakistan and China, do support medium to long-term, at least they oppose immediate withdrawal. And I think this is how it will stay. And in case the U.S. troops pulled out of Afghanistan, it could obviously perhaps lead to or revive the old factional wars among various warlords. But one would hope that it does not happen, because 18 years is a long period. All these warlords have learned their lessons, including the Taliban, who seem to be a different and transformed movement, who have moved away from their mid-90s agenda of oppression against women, against education. They are, I think, much more informed, much more rational and pragmatic people right now. So one would hope that the present negotiations, present efforts, diplomatic efforts, do culminate in some sort of intra-Afghan dialogue, which leads up to an interim setup for a better future of Afghanistan.
All right, we're going to thank Mr. Imtiaz Gul for his insight and analysis as he provided for us. He is an analyst who is speaking to us there, sharing his thoughts on Turkey's possible role vis-a-vis the encouragement of Pakistan in Afghanistan and regional issues as well. Let's add another voice to this conversation. We're now joined with Mr. Majid Mahmood, who is a research associate at the Institute of Strategic Studies. Majid, thanks for joining us once again here in The Scope. What do you make of this meeting that took place in Turkey between the Pakistani Prime Minister and Turkish President? Seemingly now we're going to have a trilateral meeting after March. How important do you think it is for Turkey to be involved in the Afghan peace process?
Well, if you look at the history of Turkish involvement in the Afghan affairs, especially in recent years, Turkey has been involved in many diplomatic initiatives to solve the Afghan problem. So it wasn't really a surprise that Turkey supported Pakistan's stance on political settlement of the Afghan dispute. In this context, Turkey has been part of the Heart of Asia process. It has been hosting meetings, several meetings in the multilateral framework and in the bilateral framework as well. Even the certain Taliban leaders have also visited Turkey from time to time to have a dialogue and sit with the relevant stakeholders. So in this context, it wasn't a surprise, but it is a major political development, I think, and supporting Pakistan's stance, because Pakistan and Turkish stance on the issue is same regarding the political settlement and peaceful resolution of the dispute between the warring parties. So in the joint statement, if you see, Turkey has endorsed Pakistani position in the for the Pakistani initiative. Yeah. So I think these developments will take momentum. The peace process between Taliban and the warring factions. There have been certain recent meetings which were important, And if you add this, the diplomatic push from Pakistan and Turkey, I think it would gain momentum in coming days.
But I mean, I imagine, Majid, that if I play devil's advocate for a moment, people may ask, can Turkey be trusted? Because at the end of the day, Turkey is a NATO member, is it not? So will it just be doing the bidding of NATO?
No, actually, the point is that NATO is an American architecture. Yeah. So America is supporting and using all instruments to bring Taliban to the table. So Pakistan is one instrument, Turkey is another instrument, and other countries like Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, they have their own part to play, and America is pushing them to play their respective roles and influence the thinking of the Taliban. So I don't think there is a trust deficit as far as the America and Turkey are concerned, and Turkey is very much supporting this American initiative. So I'm not sure there is a matter of an issue of trust here in that context.
But to be fair, then, Majid, then the issue of the entire past 17, 18 years does come up, doesn't it? And the American decision, a NATO decision to go into Afghanistan to begin with. And obviously, that's water under the bridge, but it's important to reflect on that, isn't it? The fact that in these 17, 18 years, it doesn't seem really like NATO or the US really won, quote unquote. The Taliban are still strong. So how do you reflect on that?
Well, that is a reality that America and its NATO allies have failed in Afghanistan over the past 17 years. And the Taliban and the other resisting movements, not just the Taliban. Taliban are the main component, of course, about the resistance to the American occupation. So, yes, this is a glaring failure, and it also reflects on the American weakness that it has generated in the international system, that it is not able to impose its will unilaterally over Afghanistan, or for that matter, other problematic areas as well in Middle East and in Asia Pacific. So there is one thing this, and other issue is the American domestic politics. You see, Trump came with the slogan of America First, which essentially meant that he would reduce the American footprint in the wars which are ongoing, which are failing wars actually. So we have seen the abrupt announcement of withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria. Yeah. Yes, and then he has also talked about drawdown of 7,000 troops from Afghanistan. Whether or not at which pace it would take place, that is a separate matter. Yeah. But Trump is tired of this failing war, and he wants to have a certain regional settlement before partially withdrawing. It will not completely withdraw, in my opinion. America is not going to permanently or completely withdraw from Afghanistan, but it wants to substantially reduce its commitment to Afghanistan.
One of the, I imagine, concerns that Pakistan has, Majid, would be that of any instability once again in Afghanistan. Although there is still instability to an extent, but, if there were to be further insecurity and instability on its border with Afghanistan, what would that mean for more asylum seekers or refugees, etc.? Because now Europe, Majid, has named all Afghan refugees as economic migrants. So that means that they will not be given humanitarian protection. Do you think that is a concern, and do you think that's a reason why possibly Pakistan is so enthusiastic right now at this point in time about ensuring this peace process in Afghanistan goes through?
Well, there are many factors certainly that is impacting or informing Pakistani policy towards Afghanistan, but certainly the issue of refugees and spillover of further civil war into Pakistan from Afghanistan, that is a major source of concern in Pakistan. But you see, the problem is that about the end game. I mean, refugees, of course, is one issue. But what is the end game that we desire? That is the main part, because if the end game we desire is the permanent American presence in Afghanistan, which is, of course, it will be limited with a limited footprint. That would further fuel a war in Afghanistan. the war will not stop. Even if certain factions come out to the table and may agree to certain political arrangement with the Kabul regime and United States, still there will be other factions that would be carrying out the war against the occupation. So it's between, like you say, between a rock and a hard place for Pakistan. But certainly the refugee issue is an important consideration in Pakistan. And quite lately, I mean, our official attitude towards the refugees, Afghan refugees, have not been quite positive. And that has also created negativity about Pakistan within Afghanistan and the larger Pashtun population. So we have to mend fences on that social front as well.
Very well, Majid. We'll leave it there at that as our final word. But of course, we appreciate your time and to share your thoughts with us on this important topic. Let me thank all of our guests from the top. We were joined earlier by Mr. Imtiaz Gul, analyst, who was speaking to us, sharing his thoughts with us. We appreciate his analysis and insight, of course. We were also joined by Dr. Khalid Aghoz, International Relations Professor and Managing Director of Social Policy and Development Center, speaking to us from Karachi. Then we had at the end there Majid Mahmood, Research Associate at the Institute of Strategic Studies in Islamabad. Now, of course, viewers, as all of our guests spoke about, this meeting between Imran Khan and President Erdogan of Turkey in Turkey itself seems to have borne fruit in the sense that Turkey will now host this trilateral meeting between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Turkey after March 31st there in Istanbul. That, of course, an effort to further the Afghan peace process. This only one of many tracks that Pakistan is pursuing for that peace process to be strengthened. Keep a very close eye on how that situation develops. This is certainly not the first step that Pakistan has taken, and we'll see how all of those steps work out for not just Afghanistan, but for Pakistan as well. Well, that's all from me for the moment. This has been Scope, and I've been Waqar Rizvi.